Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So today we're going to be taking a look at some decks that have been finding success in the wake of the recent OTA changes that dropped yesterday. I got a lot of positive feedback on the Wiccan video I did recently, going over some of the decks that were really shining for that card, so I figured that we'd do something similar here with the decks that have been seeing some success after the OTA. Before we go over the decks, I'm just going to give some quick thoughts on the impact of the changes. We actually got quite a few changes this OTA. However, I'd argue that they weren't super duper impactful changes in terms of things that are actually going to shake up or change the metagame or really push people to build new decks. I think there was like one card in specific that will have a positive impact there in terms of, buffing up a card that was previously unplayable and making people experiment more. But in general, a lot of the nerfs we saw and even some of the buffs took away or added a very minuscule amount of power. The plus side of that is that, well, you don't have to worry about the decks using those cards feeling like you can't play them or they're deleted. People naturally have an impulse to want to avoid cards that were nerfed, but in the case of this patch, so many cards only got just one small power shaved off the top, and those cards were already very powerful, and so far at least it seems they are still really strong. Thena's a particularly funny one here because one of the common play lines with Thena was making sure you didn't buff her up too much to get her in Shang range, and now by losing that 1 point of power, she can actually dodge Shang-Chi easier. The big star of the patch, though, no doubt, is Man-Thing. Definitely feels like the card that received the most notable buff, taking a card that was just really too fringe, too niche, too underpowered, and giving it a bit more of a role in helping to counteract decks that really try and spam a lot of small cards. So some of the main decks we're going to look at here are Man-Thing focused, because he was the real standout card that I think actually promoted more interesting brewing and deck building, as opposed to a lot of the other changed cards where they still function very, very well in the decks they were previously in. The first deck we got to talk about here is Thanos. So there's a lot to say about Thanos. Thanos received the Mind Stone going back to a 1/1, and I think this was a really, really good change for Thanos. However, Thanos' problems are a lot deeper than, the Mind Stone losing a cost can fix. And I think it's a multifaceted issue. I think he is still suffering from the fact that, you always have Thanos starting in hand, so you're not seeing as many of your other desirable cards, namely the stones on those early turns of the game, and that still hits him pretty hard. The other factor here that I found to be really difficult for him to overcome is there are just a lot of hostile matchups to Thanos. Now, initially, I found success with this deck, and I do think it is better than it was before. But it's kind of like we're upgrading something that's like a D+ to a C-. It's better, but it's not better enough to make it a overly appealing choice, unfortunately. Now, if you're not concerned about playing like the most competitive deck and don't mind leaving against bad matchups, there is still a lot of fun to be had here with Thanos. I genuinely enjoyed playing it, and especially while people were doing more experimenting with different builds right after the OTA, it definitely felt like it was having some success into those more varied and unrefined decks. However, as time has passed on and people have started to realize, oh hey, this Arishem card and this Cassandra Nova card are still really, really good, well, Thanos really didn't appreciate that. And those aren't the only decks Thanos does not appreciate in this metagame. Loki has always been a really rough matchup for Thanos. Since we run so many big impact, high cost cards, Loki getting them for cheaper is really, really rough. And then junk, like these junk clog decks are just so much more popular and powerful than they were back when Thanos was kind of the metagame tyrant. And since Thanos is naturally filling up his board with the stones, he's much more vulnerable to those decks, as well as locations that kind of limit you on your ability to play cards. So if you are looking for a Thanos deck, I do think this is the way to go with it. I think if you're trying to play Thanos right now, Lockjaw Thanos is the way to go. I did find some success with it. I found a lot of fun with it too. But in general, when I found people were moving back more towards these established meta decks, Thanos just really can't keep up with that competition consistently, sadly. And I really hope they continue to examine this and maybe give him some more potential buffs in the future, because he very sorely needs them. Some ideas that I think could help are giving him another card draw by putting that back on the Reality Stone, and probably my favorite idea of the bunch, and one that's pretty thematic, would be making it so the Power Stone applies power per stone played or in play. So instead of giving him that +10 when you've played all the stones, give him, +2 for each other stone in play. You still get the same final result, but it kind of plays into the fantasy a lot better of Thanos getting more powerful as he picks up the stones, and it would give him a much needed boost in power. It is a lot of fun though, so if you do just want to have some fun games with Thanos, definitely would recommend checking this one out. If you played Thanos Lockjaw before, this probably looks familiar and you understand how this kind of deck works, but the general idea here is we're just trying to cheat out big things. That is the name of the game. Trying to spam out some stones, draw through our deck, get our Lockjaw or some of our other ways of gaining excess energy like Hope Summers and Psylocke, and use those things to get big guys out ahead of curve. Mockingbird and Sasquatch are absolute all-stars in this deck, choosing Sasquatch over Cull Obsidian because you can make him cheaper, which can be fairly relevant just by playing out the stones, and he also gets Chimera protection, which Cull does not receive. You could put Cull in that spot if you do not have Sasquatch as a budget substitution, and I'm sure some people are going to be a little confused by the lack of Blob, but for me personally, Alioth and Magneto were far more impactful 6-drops. Alioth was probably the best one in the deck and won me some games that I very much would not have won otherwise, mainly because opponents just don't really expect it. Scar has some really nice payoffs here, just because we have so many 10-power cards. It's not unusual to get him down to 2 or sometimes even free cost, which is super nice. Vision is cool because he gives us some flexibility in where we're moving our power, and if he pops out of the Lockjaw, you can move him somewhere else and then throw more stones or small cards into the Lockjaw to get more big things out. Chimera is that much needed protection against Shang-Chi. Jeff helps us a little bit against Clog stuff. And then Hope and Psylocke really are just giving us alternate methods of getting extra energy to cheat out these big cards in the games when we don't find our Lockjaw, or making it easier to play more of our cards into the Lockjaw when we do. The real big winner of this patch, though, is definitely Man-Thing. This is the card that I think more people are going to be experimenting with than most of the other cards that got an adjustment, and for good reason. Bumping this up from a 4-5 to a 4-7 now makes it super premium on stats. He went from having an underwhelming stat line to a very premium one, while still having a fairly decent effect. And in a world where a lot of 4-drops really aren't good enough to compete right now, he definitely is more appealing than most. I opted to use him in this Sentry Annihilus Junk style deck. I really liked him here. He definitely has a solid impact. One cool fringe interaction with him involves having your Mysterio clone down in the Man-Thing lane, and then that can get sent over by Annihilus, which is kind of cool. I've also had some really neat moments where, because of Man-Thing or US Agent, Lady Deathstrike has been able to kill stuff she would not normally be able to kill. This included a really sick moment against a Patriot gamer in Onslaught's Citadel, where with the combination of Man-Thing and US Agent, all their cards in that lane were so small, Lady Deathstrike killed the whole lane, even including their Ultron. The general game plan here is nothing too different than normal from these Annihilus-style decks. You are just trying to kind of clog your opponent up while putting efficient stats down on the board. We have a good number of things that generate cards to make this Mockingbird cheaper. Our Mysterio clones, our Hood Demon, we have the arrows from Kate Bishop, and then we have a bit of tech here, mainly for the bounce matchup. I'm a big fan of Invisible Woman Killmonger just because it absolutely farms that matchup. Man-Thing already helps us a bunch, but they do still put out a lot of power, and Killmonger being guaranteed to go off at the end of the game, especially when they're very good at throwing priority, just really helps shut down that matchup. You do have to be a bit weary of when you're going to be playing the Killmonger and how to work around that so you still get value out of your things like your arrows or your demon. But once you get the hang of it, I think it's really not that hard to do. Those are definitely the flex spots of the deck though. You don't necessarily need to run these techs. You could try different ones, or you can even go with a non-tech approach if you really want. Some other cards that I think are good in this list are things like Nico Minoru, Shadow King, and Viper, to name a few. Deathstrike's been super sweet in this list in combination with all the Affliction. I think it's very important in these Annihilus lists to make sure you have another way of getting rid of that Sentry Void. A lot of players opt for Cersei. Cersei is a card that has betrayed me one too many times though, so as soon as I saw that Lady Deathstrike was getting that +1 buff, it felt like a great opportunity to try her again, and she has been especially fun and powerful in combination with Man-Thing. This ended up being my best performing deck of the night, so if you like this kind of archetype, I definitely recommend trying it out. Another cool place I've found a bit of a home for Man-Thing is this Toxic Sera style deck where we're doing a bit of the Clog game plan, but this is really more of a combo-centric deck where we're trying to reduce the cost of our cards and potentially even extend the game a little further to guarantee we're getting our Ajax, a way to copy it in Mystique, and then our Hazmat to send them to the moon in terms of points. I think there's definitely some refinement that could be done here, but in general, I like this version so far. Ravonna is pretty cool because we have just a decent amount of things we can reduce with it. Our Green Goblin, our Cassandra Nova, our Mystique. The thing I really like that she enables, though, is that she makes it so we don't 100% have to rely on magic for the full combo. I think magic is nice because getting that extra draw gives you a better chance of getting your full combo, but if you have all the pieces in hand, Ravonna plus Sera enables you to be able to play Ajax, Mystique, and Hazmat all on the final turn of the game. Cassandra acts mainly as a Arishem check, but is also still just a very premium 3-drop if played early in the game, and provides us a much needed answer to help dealing with Arishem, while giving a small bonus in the games where we might not find our full combo for Ajax. We have a few main ways to clog up the opponent's board with White Widow, Green Goblin, and Debris. I'm considering adding another clog piece in here, something like Kate Bishop to get that Acid Arrow, or Doc Ock, or even a Titania to accompany the White Widow or Goblin. That's something I'm considering, but for the time being, I have been running Jeff in that slot to help out versus other decks that are trying to clog us up. Man-Thing's been really good here though, because if you do manage to clog a lane, usually it's full of a bunch of cheaper cost stuff, so he can kind of close that lane out, and he does provide us with some more needed redundancy to make Ajax still a pretty viable threat, even when we aren't finding our Hazmat. And then Sera's just our big combo enabler, making it so that we can play a bunch of these cards all in the same turn, and hopefully take our opponent off guard in terms of our expected total power output. While I doubt this is the absolute best home for Ajax, it has been fun and effective for me, especially if you're someone like me who has really missed getting a chance to make use of Sera. And then in a similar vein, we have Mr. Negative. Nothing too super new or groundbreaking here, so we're not going to dive into this one super deep, but the general idea here being, well, hey, Cassandra Nova is 0 now, so she is better in negative. The meme lives on, but it's kind of true here, because now you can draw her with Jane. And the general idea of this deck is, we have that whole Wong package where Sage or Cassandra can just absolutely go to the moon, and then we can use a flipped Taskmaster to copy that power and win another lane. We have the negative mainstays here like Iron Man and Mystique. We have ways of getting negative out earlier in Psylocke and Ravonna. I opted to go with Ironheart just as some more redundancy for the Wong package, but if you are running into decks that are trying to limit you a bit more with things like Mobius or Sandman, you probably want to slot in a Black Panther in that spot, so you can do the Wong Panther Zola combo and still have a chance to beat those decks that try and lock you down. Negative is still a very all-in combo deck though, so you have to be super vigilant about those snaps and retreats if you want to get some positive cubes out of it. Real quick, I want to talk about Arishem. Arishem really brushed off this nerf like nobody's business. The deck still feels incredibly powerful to play, This is just the autocomplete version that the game threw together, and I think it's pretty close to the list that was mostly standard for a lot of people before the OTA, and I think is still pretty popular right now, though I wouldn't be surprised to see people swapping out that Enchantress for a potential Man-Thing. Personally, though, I did make a few changes after the OTA. With the prevalence of Loki, I think there is a bigger downside to having cards like Shadow King and Cassandra Nova in your Arishem deck against opposing Lokis, whether they be regular or Arishem variants. So I opted to make a few changes here, including dropping Blob, which I don't think you really have to do, but was more kind of a personal preference thing, because I don't think you usually want more than 2 main big threat 6-drops, not counting Mockingbird, because let's be honest, you aren't paying 6 mana for Mockingbird most of the time. But you still have your Quinjet for cost reduction, you still have your Coulson for generation, you still have Copycat to scam people, same with Loki. Shang's your main piece of interaction. Man-Thing, you know, I was thinking about, I was like, oh, I'm so excited to finally play this card and build around it and all this fun stuff. And I still am, but it turns out, you know, if it's really good as a 4-drop in regular decks, it's probably really, really good as a 3-drop in Arishem decks, especially because Arishem decks typically do not run a lot of smaller cards. They are focused on those more bigger cost cards since they have that automatic energy cheat built in. Deathstrike, definitely a flex spot, but I do think it takes people by surprise, and her coming down on 4 is just backbreaking versus some decks. Legion is our location control, and he's another one where you can really like lock out games or get huge cube swings if people aren't expecting it. Doom has nice synergy with Mockingbird and provides us with a large threat that isn't vulnerable to Shang-Chi. Mockingbird is just really busted in Arishem as always, and then Alioth really helps us out with just closing out the game, especially because due to the energy advantage, you often have priority. While the deck was showing up a little bit less after the patch than it was before it, I think people are going to very quickly realize this deck is still strong, if not one of the best decks in the game, and I would be very surprised if it does not continue to define the format. And if you're someone who's really sick of losing to Arishem, well, the Thena nerf really didn't do too much damage to one of the harder counters for the deck in this Darkhawk, Mystique, and Cassandra Nova deck. I was running into a ton of Arishem just before the patch, and this deck was doing very well at consistently crushing them, just because we have all the cards that they don't like to see, as well as a little surprise way of protecting them in Cosmo. It's always surprising to me how much less people play a card that gets like a small nerf. Thena's been a good example of that, but she seems still really strong and now has a breakpoint that is a little bit less awkward with Shang-Chi if you're scaling her up consistently every turn. So I really don't think the nerfs to Thena and Cassandra Nova did much to weaken this deck. It still seems very strong to me. You pump up your scalers and Thena and Angela and Kitty. Ravonna helps you get down some of your powerful cards earlier on, or being able to play them together more easily later on in the game. Copycat absolutely scam stuff. Korg and Rockslide, just, you know, they help Darkhawk do the Darkhawk thing when you're not running into Arishem, where it's kind of free. And then Cosmo, definitely the big star here. I know a lot of people ran Juggernaut in some of the other Thena lists, but I think Cosmo is just the better pick right now because it is harder to interact with, and we are seeing more board spam decks become more popular, like Bounce and Zoo, where Juggernaut just isn't as effective as a tool, in my opinion. So I think Cosmo is definitely the way to go in terms of protecting those big threats like your Hawk or your Cassandra Nova. Also, if you want to see some live gameplay of the Thanos deck, as well as the Man-Thing Annihilus deck, I have been doing dual streams recently, so that is up on YouTube. I'll leave a link in the comments below if you want to check that out. And yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know what you think of the decks and the OTA in the comments below. Did you like the changes? Did you dislike the changes? And maybe what are some other ones you're hoping to see in the future? I'd love to hear it. That's going to wrap it up for this video, though. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.